welcome back to my channel, Yumi Man. Sounds so cheesy. I thought I'd do a little bit of an intro for this video because this video is a little bit different. It's not a vlog style video. It is actually me showing you some recipes of some stock standard meals that I like to have in the fridge for the week. I'm pretty busy throughout the week because of work and I do quite a bit of training, so I like to have some staples in my house to make sure I'm still eating a nutritious diet. My preference is always homemade food, so I thought I would share some of my recipes that I make a lot. I hope you like it. It is the first time I've ever filmed myself cooking, and I realized I never use measurements, so I was really just trying to figure out how I could articulate it in a way that you could actually make this at home. If you try any of the recipes, let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and if you like these kind of videos, then I'll try and make some more in the future. Let's get started. So for this recipe, you're going to need some flour, instant dried yeast, olive oil, some lukewarm water, and salt and pepper. Optional to add some cherry tomatoes, chili oil, and sesame seeds. I'm actually doing a day of meal prep, so I'm going to make one of my staples, which I always have in the house, which is focaccia bread. A while back, I stopped buying bread. I just found that supermarket bread, I just really didn't know what was in it. It was lasting a really long time, and I like to eat quite clean and know what's in my food. And bread is just something that feels really wholesome, I guess nostalgic in a way. And it's always nice to see the end results of your creations. So I'm going to make focaccia bread today. I've never put this in recipe format, so I don't actually own any measuring utensils in my house, so I'm improvising. So I've got a standard glass, which is about 250 mils, and a jar, which is a litre. So this is how I've measured out my lukewarm water. For the initial stages, you need flour, yeast, and water. Most bread recipes use some kind of sugar, so honey or something to help activate the yeast, but I'm not going to use anything because I'm trying to actively reduce my sugar intake, even the smallest amounts. So to start, get a large bowl. I don't actually have one, so I'm using a large pot. And into that pot, you want to add about 3 cups of flour. So awkward. Yeah, perfect. And then you can add your yeast. So I'm just using active dry yeast today. So I'm using 1.5 teaspoons for this one. And then to that, just near the yeast, pour in your lukewarm water. And that's the first stage. So you just need to leave it to sit for about 15 minutes, allow the yeast to activate. If you see that the yeast isn't fully submerged in the water, just give it a little bit of a mix. But it's just all about bread's all about patience. So you just need to give it 15 minutes until it's activated. Then we're going to add the salt and give it a bit of a mix, then allow it to rest. I added a time lapse of the yeast activating so you could see the bubbles forming and the yeast actually activating with the warm water. Once that's activated, add a teaspoon of salt to the mix and give it a nice good stir. While I was stirring this mix, I quickly realized that I didn't add enough flour, so I added 2 more cups of flour and mixed it until it formed a more solid mixture, as you can see. It's still quite a wet mixture as this is a focaccia,
but it has come together to not be so gloopy and more elastic. Once you've mixed that all up, cover with a towel. After a couple of hours, you would have noticed that it has risen nicely. We want to now push down that air and allow for it to re-rise. I've just used my hands here. I've put some water on the side to help the dough from not sticking, but I would highly recommend not using your hands and just using a spatula. This is clearly a mistake on my part, and I usually don't, but I was trying to be creative this time around. Once you push the dough down, recover it with a towel and leave it for another hour. While you're waiting for the bread to rise, you can start preparing your pan. So here I have a 40 centimeter by 27 centimeter pan, which I'm just going to put about a tablespoon of olive oil and a teaspoon of salt with a bit of pepper. I'm going to use my hands to distribute that throughout the pan, and then sprinkle on some sesame seeds. These sesame seeds are just straight up sesame seeds. They don't have to be roasted. They'll roast nicely or crisp up in the oven with the bread. The third and final hour of the bread rising has passed, and now we can start putting it into the pan. So as you can see, I've opted for a spatula this time around. You're just going to pour all of that mix in, making sure to get everything from the pot / bowl. Here comes the fun part, the toppings. So as I said, these are all optionals and you can mix and match whatever flavor profile you'd like. But for this recipe, I've gone with some cherry tomatoes, salt, pepper, sesame seed, garlic, and chili oil. I later realised that I actually don't want the sesame seeds. So I grab that chili oil and put about 3 to 4 teaspoons of chili oil onto the bread. Then I sprinkle some garlic powder on top. I'd probably say about a teaspoon. Some cracked pepper, some tomatoes. Just scatter those around. Doesn't have to be perfect, but just nicely distributed across the bread. And then about 1.5 teaspoons of salt at the top. As you'll see, it's the outer case, the crust of the focaccia that has all the flavour. So I like to make sure it's nice and seasoned. Now, let's get our hands dirty. Use your fingers to push down the flavour and cover the whole focaccia with that chili oil. Clean your workbench and pop it in the oven. So I cook the bread for 30 minutes, 15 minutes, and then I'll turn it around just to allow for an even cook. Once it's ready, take it out, let it sit for about 15 minutes, and then use a spatula to help get the bread out of the pan. I'll let it rest for another 15 minutes, and then cut and serve as you please. So there you have it. Homemade focaccia bread. It's definitely a favorite of mine. It's a really great recipe to be able to play around and do different flavor profiles. Hope you try it out and hope you enjoy. The next recipe is a cottage cheese vegetable frittata. This one is 8 eggs, 500 ml of cottage cheese, salt, pepper, spices of your choice, but I'm using paprika, turmeric, and oregano for this one, olive oil, and optional vegetables. So I'm using garlic, zucchini, potato, carrot, and onion. So I started off by mincing 1 clove of garlic. So mince that up. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just a fine dice at the bare minimum. I like to put my knife to the side and scrape it on the board to get it as minced as possible. Once that's done, pop that in a bowl and slice an onion. It was a terrible idea to go first because these were some pungent onions and my eyes were watering. You'll notice my cutting just progressively gets worse as I can no longer see. However, I did prevail and continue to cut these carrots into thin slices just to match the onions.
I'm so miserable.
So that's what it looks like. Pop those to the side, grab another bowl, and let's start on these potatoes. So I've just sliced these potatoes thinly, probably 1/2 centimetre each, so that they can cook evenly. Pop these on the bowl, and then started with my zucchini. Zucchini, exact same. It doesn't have to be diagonal slices, but that was just the theme I was going with, and about 1/2 centimetre thick. So that's all the chopping done. And there's carrots, garlic, potato, zucchini. Now let's cook it up. So I've popped the pan on a medium heat. Put about 1.5 teaspoons of oil, I would say. And then added my onion and carrots and garlic. To this I added some salt, about a teaspoon, some pepper, a solid crack, and give it a bit of a mix. So the salt in particular helps the onions release the water and sweat down. Once that's done, I start adding the herbs. So I've got some oregano here, about a teaspoon, some turmeric, about 1/2 teaspoon, or maybe 1, that was generous, and some paprika, 1/2 teaspoon. Give it a mix again. Toss, 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 toss. You'll notice with me, I tend to use a lot of herbs and spices. I do this to increase the diversity in my diet in terms of the plants that I include in my diet. It's really good for your gut health. Voila! And pop that to the side in a bowl. In the same pan, because one thing I hate the most out of anything is dishes. So 1.5 teaspoons of olive oil, then the zucchinis go in. Flatten out those zucchinis so they can cook evenly, and add some salt. And of course pepper. Zucchinis tend to cook really fast. So at this point I just flip them all over, cook them for a minute, and then remove them from the heat. For the last one I thought, okay, I'll clean the pan a little bit, just with a damp towel, to allow for the potatoes to have a bit more of a chance to look pretty. So 1.5 teaspoons of oil again. Pop those potatoes in. Use your chopsticks or your spatula, whatever you want to use, to flatten them out so that they can cook evenly. Potatoes are a little bit stubborn because they have a lot of starch that naturally makes them want to stick together. To that I added some salt and pepper. Covered with a lid and left for 2 to 3 minutes before taking the lid off and flipping them over. The reason I put the lid on is actually to allow it to steam a little bit and cook a bit faster. Once turned, put the lid back on, cook for a couple more minutes, and they're done. They don't have to be fully cooked because they will cook once again in the oven when the frittata is cooking. Now all of our ingredients are prepped. You can move the vegetables to the side. I don't know why I had them in frame. But we're going to crack all of our eggs into a medium-sized bowl. I was very unimpressed with my egg cracking skills during this shot. I basically broke all of them. Then add a teaspoon of salt, some pepper, and the cottage cheese into the bowl. Once all of the ingredients are added, just give it a solid mix until everything's combined. The mixture won't be smooth because of the cottage cheese, but it should be evenly mixed. Time lapse. And that's done. I mixed it for about 2 to 3 minutes. Let's assemble. Get some baking paper and pop that on your baking tray. I am using a 40 centimeter by 27 centimeter dish and adding the onions and carrots first. Then I add about 1/3 of the egg mixture and then pop the potatoes on top for an even layer. I actually use the potatoes to help push the mixture to the sides so that it's even. Then add the onions and carrots again for the final layer. And add zucchini on top as well. Finally, press everything down so that it's nice and flat. Add a bit more potatoes, just to use all the ingredients, and top it with the remaining egg mix. Using a spatula, spread the egg mix to the sides so that everything is evenly distributed, and mainly so that it can cook evenly. Pop that in the oven at 160 for 30 minutes. After 15 minutes, turn it around and cook for a further 15.
So the frittata is done, yay! I'm going to now cut it up. Usually I would suggest to let it cool before you cut it, but I'm being a little bit impatient
hence I'm doing it now. But this amount for me does about 8 portions. So usually when my partner is here, we share this between the 2 of us. So this does me for 4 days of the week, and I like to eat it for breakfast at work. So I just put them into nice rows. Like so. And then there you go. Here's a slice. You can see it from a side angle. And that's my cottage cheese frittata. Our cottage cheese vegetable frittata makes about 8 portions. Super easy, super delicious. Highly recommend. Great start to your day. For this recipe, you'll need Buco red wine passata, beef stock cubes, flour, bay leaves, thyme, oregano and chili, garlic, carrots, onions, salt and pepper, and olive oil. Okay, so to make this Buco, I'm going to start by prepping all the vegetables first. We actually cook the meat first, but it's easy to have everything organized so that when it does come to cooking, we can just do it really quickly. So I'm actually not going to start with the onions first, because last time I tried to record something where I was cutting onions, my eyes really burnt and I couldn't see for the rest of the cutting. So I'm going to tactically go with the things that don't make me cry first. Starting with carrot. So with carrots, I actually don't peel them because the nutrients or the highest part of the nutrients is just under the skin. So when you peel it, you take it out. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to slice this about 1 centimeter thick. It doesn't have to be diagonal like this. I'm just doing that out of force of habit. All of this is just a rough chop. It's going to be cooking for a few hours, so it doesn't have to be perfect. This is actually my partner's favorite dish. And I told him I was making it today, and he's actually on holiday in Colombia, so he can't make it. Can't make it to dinner. Like I said, everything just needs to be a rough chop, so this doesn't even really have to be minced per se, just diced. And then the onions just a rough slice. Whichever direction of the onions you want to cut it, it really doesn't bother me. If you want to cut them into squares, you can even cut them into squares. It's whatever your preference is. I can already feel the pungencies of these onions, so I'm so glad I left it for last. Oh my god. You can progressively see my chopping's getting worse because my vision's getting worse. I'm losing it. And that's the vegetable prep.
Every time. Okay, so now that we've done the vegetables, we're going to focus on the osso buco. So for those who don't know, osso buco is beef. It's just above the shank, so it's that thigh part of the cow. And it's notoriously remembered for this bone in the middle, which also has a chunk of marrow, so that adds a lot of flavor, and it's used to make stewed meat. It's quite a hard-working muscle in the cow, so it's tough naturally. So this meal, it takes about 3 to 5 hours to cook on a really slow heat, but I like to do it for just 3 hours because I'm impatient. Anyway, so I'm going to prepare the meat. So I use a different chopping board to prepare this. I highly recommend this to do. And I've got some flour here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do basic seasoning. So just salt, pepper, and flour. The flour is going to crust the meat. So I'm going to keep one hand on the meat. And the other hand for everything else. So this is just an initial seasoning. I'm probably doing, oh, gosh. I'm probably doing about a teaspoon of salt for each side. And just a dusting. Slap that bad boy. If you want to make this gluten-free, you can easily take the flour out. This also works as a thickening agent for the stew. So you can replace it with cornstarch if you want to do a gluten-free alternative. Or if you just don't want any flour at all, you don't have to do it at all.
Okay, let's cook the meat. So I've put the pot onto a medium to high heat and put about a tablespoon of olive oil. I'm going to sear this meat, so I'm popping the 2 osso bucos into the pan and I'm going to cook it for about 2 minutes until there's a nice char on one side. After 2 minutes is over, I'll turn it over and cook it on the other side for a further 2 to 4 minutes. Once that's seared, remove the osso buco, put it on a plate and put it to the side. In the same pan, we're going to cook the vegetables. So reduce the heat to a medium heat. You'll see the pan is quite hot. Add about a tablespoon of olive oil. Then add the vegetables, some salt and pepper, and your herbs. So I'm popping the thyme and the oregano at this stage. Cook and saute until the onions had some time to saute. Then add the chili flakes. And the bay leaves. Now it's time for us to add the passata. If you're strong enough, open the passata firstly and then pour the whole thing in. You'll see that there's a bit of passata left, and because I like to use everything up fully, I actually get wine and pour it into the passata jar. So got about 300 mils of red wine. It can be any type of red wine that you enjoy. Right now I have some Cabernet Sauvignon, and so that's what I've decided to use. So give it a bit of a swirl and then pour that into the pot as well. Add your 2 stock cubes. You can break them up if you like, otherwise you can just pop them in whole, and give it all a mix. Once that's combined, it looks a little bit like this. I'm going to add the Osso Buco in now. So the important stage here is when you put the Osso Buco in, it needs to be completely submerged in the sauce. You'll realize that it is quite a dense, concentrated sauce at the moment. And because we've added the stock cubes, they will in fact be quite a strong taste. So add about 300 mils of water. This is just room temperature water, nothing special. You can see now the meat is submerged. I'm giving it a bit of a stir to make sure the meat is fully underneath, and then topping it with a lid. Leave to cook for 3 hours. This is my 2-hour checkpoint with my happy little spatula. Giving it a bit of a mix. As you can see that the meat is falling off the bone here. The bone is literally there. And it's thickening up quite nicely. Wobble, wobble, wobble. This is a really nice hearty stew. It's exceptional in the winter time, but we eat it all throughout the year. And this whole recipe makes about 6 to 8 portions. So once it's taken off the heat, we need to pull out the parts of the stew that are unedible, e.g. the bay leaf and the bones and the sinuate of the meat. So here you'll see me pulling it out and just popping it into a bowl. Once that's all done, it's ready to serve. To serve, I like to use a ladle, and I am serving it here in a shallow bowl, about 3 ladles full. If you made the focaccia bread from earlier, it's a really good addition with the stew. You can also eat it with rice or mashed potatoes. Any sort of carb will absorb that sauce really well. Let's eat! Okay, so after 3 hours of cooking, I finally get to try this. I also forgot in the presentation shot to add a bit of parsley. Parsley. So the part of this is how you see the meat. So good, hits the spot. I also love to just bread, soak it in. You can also use this in like a napkin if you want for the face. It's up to you. So good. Did I not get it? So I was only planning to do 3 recipes today, but I thought I'd give you a bit of a bonus recipe, which is my mum's famous marinated roasted capsicums. So for this recipe, you really just need capsicums, olive oil, salt, pepper, and garlic. So what you'll need to do is get some capsicums. You can do this 1, 2, 3, how many capsicums you like. Pop them on a tray with some baking paper and put them in the oven, cooking them for about 15 to 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, have a check. You'll see that they're all shriveled up. Once they're cooked though, turn the heat off the oven and just leave them sitting in the oven for an hour. What this does when you leave it in the oven for an hour is it allows it to cool down, but it also allows the capsicum to sweat, and it makes the peeling process of the skin really easy. So now that the capsicums are cool, I'm going to remove the seeds and the skin from the capsicum. So I have a bowl here, one for the capsicum we'll be eating and the other for all the rubbish. What I do is I actually pop a hole at the bottom, let the juices come out, and keep those. You don't have to keep the juices, it's just optional. But that's what I prefer. So I take all the seeds out, I remove the skin, and just keep the flesh and the juices in one bowl. Repeat this process until all of them are done. Now that we've got the flesh, the cleaned flesh of the capsicums, we're going to rip them into slivers. So this is more to make them easier to eat, as I like to use them for salads and pizza toppings or pasta toppings. You can actually keep them full if you prefer. Depends whatever you're going to use them for. Once they're all placed in slices, I just top it with the remaining juices. And the container that I'm using is actually the container that I'll be storing them in. So here I've sliced some garlic up, which I'll pop on top of the capsicum. I'm adding a teaspoon of salt and some pepper. And then I'm going to drizzle it with some olive oil. This not only is for flavour, but also to help with the preservation. So these capsicums last about 7 days in the fridge. Super delicious. You can eat it purely by itself with some bread or some crackers. Definitely give it a try and enjoy. Happy eating!